Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer. Roughly 1.3 million people die every year in road accidents across the world, according to the World Health Organization, with India accounting for 11% of these deaths, despite having only 1% of the world's vehicles. So serious is the matter that Road Transport Minister Nitin Gadkari went on record to say that India's road accident situation is more dangerous than the COVID 19 pandemic. Road accident injuries, whether to motorists or pedestrians, also cause considerable economic loss to individuals, their families, and to nations as a whole. These are due to the cost of treatment as well as lost productivity of the victims as well as their families, who need to take time off from work or school to care for them. Shockingly, such accidents cost most countries 3% of their gross domestic product, with it being monsoon season when India's roads are even more treacherous. This is of particular concern.
All Indians matter.
We have on the show Madhav Pai, Program Executive Director at the World Resources Institute India Ross Center. He spearheads a large urbanization policy research and prototyping support program that informs key areas of India's urban growth story. For the last 2 decades, Madhav has led, designed, and implemented urban programs and projects in over a dozen countries. Madhav is a systemic thinker who combines his academic training in engineering and transport planning with his acumen in finding systemic solutions to complex urban problems. India's urbanization challenges are a key research focus for him. Madhav joined WRI India in 2008 and has pioneered several new and innovative methods to overcome barriers to the implementation of environmentally and financially sustainable infrastructure. Under his leadership, the team has informed several policy discussions at the national, state, and city level on road safety, urban transport, transit oriented development, electric mobility, urban and regional planning, and clean air. Welcome, Madhav.
Hi.
Madhav, according to a World Bank report, India has 4.5 lakh road crashes every year, in which 1.5 lakh people die. India tops the world in road crash deaths and injuries, 53 crashes every hour, killing one person every 4 minutes. Could you detail more how serious the situation is?
I think the numbers you've laid out, just conveys how serious the situation. And I think I simply always say, if you think, all of us have lost someone we know, a friend, a family member, to a road crash. So it's not like it's far away. It touches all our lives, and not just the crashes, right? The 4.5 lakh serious accidents. The other thing is if you get into an accident, whether it's a broken leg or a broken shoulder, sit at home for a month, 2 months, 3 months for recovery. You put on 10 pounds, 10 kilos, and then you're dealing with diabetes, and so it's a very serious issue that I think is relevant for each one of us in India. And you know what the reason is, it's not just government that can solve this problem. It will require all of us to make certain choices, and that's why it's important for this to be a much broader conversation.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Madhav. And could you talk about this from a pedestrian's point of view also?
Yeah, I live in Mumbai, and you know, in general in India, pedestrians are everywhere. Whether you are on a highway going, from one village to another in Himachal Pradesh, or whether you are walking on the streets, I would, if you stop anywhere and look around and count the number, you will count more people walking or on foot than in vehicles, right? And so this is India, right? Everybody walks, but a lot of people use motorcycles, right? But we design our roads for cars and making it unsafe for people walking, for people on motorcycles. So we, because this road building is a it's a very Western sort of concept that was brought to India. We build for cars, but majority of the users are actually not cars, and that's the result why we are seeing this sort of large number of crashes and fatalities on roads.
And that's a really interesting perspective, Madhu. I don't think most people actually look at it that way. But now, when you explain it that way, it all becomes very, very clear. Now, Madhu, the monsoon further complicates all of this, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. I always, and again, trying to make this more relatable. I was talking to a friend, and he said, And both of us used to live in the US, and he said, "Arey, I was driving to Kerala, and on the highway there was a speed breaker." And it's like, you have to, but I told him, but if you have to understand, there were two villages probably, that this highway has cut. And now those people who have been sort of walking about for years, and what happens is every single speed breaker that you encounter is, especially if it's built by the community, it's after there is a major accident or a death. So every time if we encounter a speed breaker, we should realize that it is actually somebody's life that has been lost, and that's why it's there, right? It's quite. So I think so. Monsoon just makes it worse. I think two wheelers become much more unsafe, and so one of the things that we say, and most of the converse. See, if you in Mumbai, for example, right? Every monsoon, we all hear only about potholes, and I'm not saying potholes is not a problem. Potholes is a problem, needs to be addressed. Quality, that contractors should be held accountable. But at the same time, I think when we think of a road or a street, right, more people are walking on it. And, we have to think about their safety. Two wheelers also. And so, in a city like Bombay, that's why we call this thing called safer by design, is, in a Bombay, you don't have to move faster than 30 kilometers an hour.
You can't even if you want to, I think.
Correct. So even in the peak hour, you can barely move at like 7, 8 kilometers. But by design, we can make this road be 30 kilometers an hour. And once you make it by design 30 kilometers an hour, then the motorcycles move at a slower speed, and the vehicles generally move at a slower speed, and it just makes sense. And I'll tell you why. One of the things we say is that if there is a road crash at 30 kilometers an hour, the likelihood of that fatality, that injury being serious, is about 20%. The same thing if a crash happens at 40 or 45 kilometers an hour, the likelihood of that crash becoming serious is 70-80%. So it's almost so to keep speed below 30 kilometers an hour in cities just improves the safety of the whole system. And 30 kilometers an hour in a city is good enough because, in the peak hour anyway, you move at that speed. So I think this is how we can make it safer by design. Then it doesn't matter even if it's monsoon and if you slip, the likelihood of that becoming a serious threat. So monsoon or not monsoon, the fact that we need to design our city streets to be 30 kilometers an hour. And I'll give you, you look at the Bandra Worlies, and what I mean by design, that's why traffic engineering good. If you look at the Bandra Worlies ceiling, when we say that a street, when there is no traffic, if you allow people to drive on it, the speed at which 95% of the people will drive, that's actually the design speed of the street. So it's not, then you can't, there if you put a 50-kilometer sign, that's actually making it unsafe for everybody. But there are ways you can design, you can make the lanes a little narrower. You can put speed breakers, which are not vehicle breakers, but are, good, well designed speed humps, Could you make sure that, people can't see very far, so that, so there are ways in which you can put trees, so there are ways in which we can, by design, make the streets a certain speed, and that speed should be 30 kilometers an hour, on highways 50 kilometers an hour. But inside the city there is just no reason to do it. Even if you look at Bombay, the three top locations where fatalities happen in this 2017-2018 data, two are on Eastern Express Highway, one is where the Bandra Worli ceiling sort of meets, where just at the beginning of the Bandra Worli. Again, these are all highway locations, so this is where so speed brings fatalities. So if we are serious about protecting lives and saving people, then we have to slow down our streets in our cities. So,
Yeah. And are any particular groups more vulnerable? Children, for instance?
of course, children, elderly. I mean, elderly, I feel like almost are not vulnerable. They just are, their vulnerability is because they don't leave the house. Then they get other lifestyle diseases, depression, all of those. So, I think, and same thing with children, right? I mean, we today, when I was growing up in Mumbai, when very few cars, my parents never stopped me from going on the street. But today, I wouldn't allow my daughter to walk out on the street. And then it has implications, right? I mean, it has mental health implications. It has, so all of that. I mean, it's just beyond just getting into a crash or a fatality. I do think that, And one of the things that I also say, for everybody says, but cars have to move for cities economy to run and all of that. It's fine. If you move at 30 kilometers an hour, you should be fine. But from if you're just to think about from the car's perspective, also, right? See, one of the things, and this is one of the things that happens is, every time there is a pedestrian that comes in the way of a car, and if the car is say moving at 30 kilometers an hour and it breaks, it's not just that the car is impacted, that point is impacted. The speed of that car is say 30 kilometers an hour, you know, another 150, 200, 300 meters, every vehicle has to slow down. So every time there is what we call where there are two things that are on a path of a collision. So, there is a conflict. Every time there's a conflict, whether it's between a pedestrian and a car, a pedestrian and a two wheeler and a car, basically, and the two vehicles brake to avoid collision, it actually slows down traffic behind for 100 meters to 100. And in India, we just don't provide the space for pedestrians. Bombay, if you go on any road, if you are on SV road or LBS, we have never provided adequate space. So people are out on the road. They're out on the road means every car is trying to avoid them, means they're slowing down traffic. So actually, if we provide adequate space for pedestrians, then we will actually improve the flow of traffic, right? This logic, I think people have to understand. That's why I said, this is not about, I think everybody, we need to understand this issue and then actually ask for these things. We all want wider roads. If you talk to a taxi guy, or even if you talk to a bhajiwala and say, what do we need to do, he'll say we need to widen the roads. But actually, we don't need to widen the roads. We need to allow smooth flow of traffic. We need to allow people to walk, so you can walk 3-4 kilometers. In Mumbai, anyway, if in 4-5 kilometers, you can walk. I mean, if you have good walking, you will never actually take the bus to the station. You will just walk. And I think
Yeah.
that actually will improve the traffic situation. So I think this realization we have to get.
Right. And Madhav, given the rate of crashes that we have is alarmingly high, the fatalities, injuries, etc., what is the economic implication of all this?
Yeah, it's a huge, I mean, every time, typically if you say also where the most deaths happen, they are in men, 25 to 40 are the most vulnerable, like most deaths actually happen in this category. So, this is the people who are the more earning members of the family. So, I mean, one person like this dies, I mean, it just basically puts a family like this in debt for a lifetime. I mean, it just sort of reduces opportunities for everybody else in the family to go to education. So I think it's quite a significant implication. Like I said, the other thing, even if you get into accident, I mean, if you break a leg, I mean, and most people who ride motorcycles, will tell you they have had an accident, they've broken a leg, they've sat at home for 3 months, and then they've put on 10 kilos of weight. And 10 kilos of weight brings a lot of other, costs. So I think there's a severe, I mean, you saw the World Bank number is there, I mean, 3% of GDP and all of that. But I mean, I think if we were to relate to ourselves also, I mean, there's clearly all of us will know the cost, and of course cost of a near and dear one also has other implications. So I mean, I think all of that put together.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, is there some policy level work required, or is it an implementation issue, or both?
I think both. I think one is this understanding. I think there's a need for us to reimagine how we build streets, right? I think some early work on that has happened. IRC, which is the India Road Congress, has now come up with guidelines for urban streets that talk about slower speeds. And, but, still, I mean, I think the main bureaucrats or, government officials who run, whether it's municipal corporation engineers or police, I think, still don't. I mean, always, the feeling is, I mean, for the traffic police, their job is to move traffic, right? I mean, and they are doing it. They want faster roads, wider roads for it. So I think to be able to bring this systems thinking perspective there, I think also, these are political issues. No, tomorrow if I go and slow a fast road, I mean, people will be up in arms. So it is a policy issue. It's an implementation issue, but it is also sort of this issue of communicating to a large, because it's political, right? I mean, you have to communicate that actually doing this eventually is good for all of us, and it might impact you personally because your commute will probably increase by 20 minutes, but these are the other good benefits that will come out of this, right? So this, it's not an easy conversation. We have to do it different, slowly. A lot of times now, a lot of cities have been using trials like temporary, using paints and bollards and ropes. San Francisco, in fact, city of San Francisco decided that they want to slow all their streets down to less than 30 kilometers an hour. And they said we will do this by doing it temporarily first, right? Where we will use bollards, we will use ropes, paints. So people get used to this new status quo. They can raise their complaints. And then once there is a general acceptance, then they will move it to becoming more permanent. So cities have been using. So it's not just an implementation. It's also a change in status quo, right? We all have status quo bias, and I think this is you have to change that status quo bias. And if you are not an expert in this topic, you don't really deal with it. Suddenly your commute has gone from 1 hour to 1 hour for 30 minutes, you are going to complain about it. So how do we change the status quo bias? How do you build a communication campaign around it? So I think it requires a little bit of everything, but one is to identify this, understand what is the right solution, and then more systematically try to drive change. It's a systems change. I mean, people, yeah, so it requires all parts to change. So, that's why, even in Bombay, we have started to do this status quo bias change. We've been doing this temporary installations. We did this one at HP Junction. A lot of places now across India, we are doing this, doing painting, making people realize, if you go to a junction and see all the spaces that have dust, that's where actually no vehicles are there. That space actually should not be for road. You should paint it, make it safe. Pedestrians can stay there, be safe. So I think this is how you change status quo bias and create the acceptance, right? And so that also convinces the police. So once we did this whole Bandra HP Junction trial, police also realized actually narrowing and streamlining the streets improved traffic flow, and the pedestrians' lives also improved. So I think then they were all convinced saying, "Nee, nee, let's do this." So I think that's how I think we need to go about this.
So in this context, Mother, what is traffic engineering and how will it help?
So what and traffic engineering was something that was invented in the US. It was invented when cars came about, right? In the US, 90% of the people travel using cars. In India or in Mumbai, if you like, only 3% people use cars, right? About 45% people are only walking. Then the rest use public transport. Most of them also walk to public transport. So now you have to engineer the road space, which is a public space, or the right, we don't want to call it road space also, right? We want to engineer that space to facilitate the movement of the people, right? If majority of the people are walking, you have to give them adequate space. So we have to engineer our roads to meet to the demand, and I think that's what traffic engineering is. And traffic engineering typically has two three ideas. One is to make sure that you are facilitating smooth movement of people or vehicles, right? And in our case, we are only thinking about moving cars, but I think once we think about two wheelers and moving people, then we will design it very differently. And that's why I said these are two three things. I talked about conflict. So when to ensure smooth movement, you have to reduce conflicts. And this conflict is not just between vehicles, right? It's also between cars. We use signals also, but then the rest of the way. So one is to reduce conflicts. The other is this idea of shock wave that I told, that every time there is a conflict, the impact is not felt just there, but maybe 400-500 meters back. And it has huge implications. So I think this idea of shock wave needs to be understood. And again, you need to design. The other thing is that we need to the idea of design speed that I explained earlier. That design, you can design a facility for the speed at which you want vehicles and people to travel. And posting a speed limit is not the trick. It's actually doing the design with these features of how wide a lane is, how far you can see, a speed hump, which is what we call a well-designed speed breaker. All of those things can be used. So traffic engineering is essentially using is to design the street so that you can facilitate smooth movement and traffic at the speed that you desire that people should move. That's traffic engineering. And I think that is what I think we need to develop as a science in our cities, because we have just adopted a Western thinking about it. But given the high number of pedestrians, etc.,
Yeah.
I think in India we need to develop this for ourselves.
Yeah. So since you mentioned pedestrians, what is pedestrianization and how would that help?
So there are two things. Pedestrians, most pedestrians die while crossing. So we have to make the crossing safe. You cast for vulnerable groups, right? So if a 75-year-old person is crossing, you can't expect him to run. Or think about a 75-year-old woman wearing a sari trying to cross, right? She can't cross. She can go maybe 15, 20 meters at one time. So if we create adequate stopping spaces and design the junction well, then you can basically, so one is to design the junctions for people to cross and stop effectively. The other is to provide adequate space for people to walk. And these are the basic two things that make a city more pedestrian friendly. A lot of times we only provide the sidewalks but we forget the junctions, and that is where also the whole safety comes. So I think the junctions plus the width of the sidewalks is an issue. So I think that, see, the other thing in the other challenge, and again, it's not very simple, right? I mean, the big fear is that we also have vending that comes, and vending has its place in our cities. So how do we accommodate vending and making sure that adequate space is there for walking becomes the challenge. And again, I think you can do some of this with good design features, etc. So,
Yeah. A while ago, the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities and the Global Road Safety Facility of the World Bank came up with some interesting research which talked about the safe systems approach. What is safe systems?
yeah, again, it's what I've been talking about. Safe system is, like I said, if you allow people to move at a speed where the crash is not going to be dangerous, then it's a safe system, right? I mean, it's a system. Road is a system, and if we want people to use it safely, so if there is a certain volume of pedestrians and a certain, then you have to design it in a way that if a crash happens, it's not fatal, right? So I mean, a highway, the speed might be different on a highway, and if on a highway, if there is a particular place where people are crossing, then we need to find a safe way in which they can cross. Within a city, I think it is to allow them to cross at the right places and generally slow down the system. So I think a safe system is where people are able to do their activities without putting their lives at risks. And in this case, I think the idea is to what we call have lower design speeds, providing adequate space for vulnerable users, which are pedestrians and cyclists, and that all increase the safety of the system.
Right. So, Madhav, tell us about WRI India's street design projects in India. Give us a broad overview.
See, we've been working mainly in cities, just trying to work with municipal corporations and traffic police to make these points, right? That we need, that actually providing adequate space for pedestrians will improve traffic flow, will reduce road fatalities, will make more people walk, and ideally walk and cycle. That will actually further reduce the demand on people moving in cars and motorcycles, etc., and sort of in general improve the livability, the quality of life, the health of our cities. So I think this is what we propagate. And it's hard, like I said, this is hard for people who have experienced the status quo for many years. So we try many approaches. We go and we do policy advocacy, we try to help with write the new rules and codes. But then I think one of the things through our experiment and trials, we realized also that to do these sort of trials with like temporary materials to change and demonstrate how this sort of what we are saying actually will function, and this change in status quo bias. And then I think once that's done, then you can go to the more permanent infrastructure. So we do a range of things. We do very high level policy advocacy. So we informed the Motor Vehicle Amendment Act with research and publications. Then at the local level, we work, do trainings for traffic police, city engineers, just to bring these concepts of traffic engineering, etc. We actually go into counting. We've been now figured out a way to count the number of pedestrians using, doing some AI and other things from like video feed. So if you have a photo, I can tell you how many pedestrians are there. And this we want to allow everybody to use so that they can, and to tell, because nobody knows how many pedestrians are there. Even an informed urban designer, if can you tell me what is the range, he will be off by 10. you know we are so off because this is numbers high. So we do create these tools and data and all of that, and then we also work with municipal corporations to do trials so that we can change the status quo bias and then really create that proof of concept before then it is more sort of mainstreamed. And then we work with then yeah.
And what has the response been like from municipal corporations, local administrations?
It's very good. I mean, I think they have been very receptive, especially in Mumbai. I think in Delhi, so more and more they realize the value, because it's that their lives are also tough, right? I mean, they are every day dealing with fatalities. They are dealing with this crazy traffic congestion. They are dealing with people jumping. I mean, jumping means into like running streams of traffic, slowing everything
Yeah.
down. And so I think bringing this sort of systems thinking perspective clearly demonstrate that things improve. And once they see it, but I think at the same time, I think there are some people whose daily commutes get impacted, and they create a hue and cry about it. So I think we need to create a broader understanding of this in the community, and I think that will help also accelerate some of these ideas. In fact, if you see some good implementations in a few places, you should demand for it, right? So I think the more people demand, the more action we will see. I think that's the side where we haven't done very well, and I think we need to do a lot more better communication outreach, and maybe some other organizations are better suited to doing that than us, so that there is a bigger demand for this sort of safe streets, safe systems for moving around in our cities.
So, what's next for WRI India on this front?
Oh, we want to keep pushing, right? Our vision is that all citizens of our cities are able to walk freely, comfortably in our cities. So yeah, where we want to keep pushing. I mean, I think where we have had successful trials, we want to work with them to mainstream it. We want like hundreds of kilometers of streets to become friendly. In places where these ideas are new, we want to help with demonstrating, and we want to be able to spread our message as wide and far as possible, so that more and more. See, we are a small organization. We are like maybe 20 people. We can only do so much, but we will do our best, and we will really look for support from everybody else to see how our voice and our message and our knowledge can be taken to more and more people across the country and the world, so that we all have sort of safer lives, right?
So, Madhav, here's a question I ask all my guests at the end of the show. Why do you do this work?
Look, I grew up in Mumbai. I grew up in a city where I could walk freely. I want that for my daughter. And I want that for myself. I mean, I want to just walk. I mean, I really enjoy walking. I think it's the freedom. So there is a very selfish perspective to it, but I do think that I also very driven by the fact that I think it just makes it more equitable, more enjoyable for everybody. And I think it's very possible in a city like Mumbai, which has such good public transport infrastructure. I think we can make this city a city where everybody can walk, and we don't have to deal with honking and driving on an everyday basis. And that's quality of life for me. And I think and we had it 30 years ago. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and now it's gone. And I wish that we can bring it back in our cities.
Yeah, same. I mean, most people, I mean, I think of our generation would remember walking to most places. That's a completely lost thing in Bombay now.
And it was the most enjoyable thing to do. It was the best way to enjoy your city. And I think this is what inspires me.
Absolutely, yeah.
To be able to enable everybody to walk and enjoy the city and be healthy
Yeah.
and happy.
Madhav, with the monsoon season, road safety requires even more attention in India, especially given our shocking number of accidents and fatalities. Thank you for shedding light on how we can make our roads safer.
So yeah, no, thank you very much. And really, I'm big message to all of you. Pedestrians need space. So please ask for it, demand it, and count the pedestrians around you. You will always see that we underprovide for them. So if we all, with a collective voice, ask for more space for pedestrians, I think we will all make our cities happier, healthier places to live. So that's my one ask from all of you. Count pedestrians around you and then ask for adequate space for them.
Thank you all for listening. Please visit allindiansmatter.in, that's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in, for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer, that's ASHRAFENGINEER, and All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Email me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.